as mentioned, this webinar is on climate emotions and nurturing our roots. This is a very important event that we are celebrating during Mental Health Awareness Month. And as many of you know, you are tuning in from different landscapes across different countries or different states here in the US. And we're really privileged for you all to be here today to have a very impactful conversations with leading experts and industry leaders that are telling a new narrative for climate change, but also climate solutions in relationship to our mental health. We have a very unique private screening of 3 media projects that we are going to be showcasing in the upcoming minutes. But to kind of get started, we're going to briefly introduce some of our speakers on here. So our first ever panelist that we have today is Kelsey. She is a PhD award-winning author, speaker, and thought leader, and she regularly leads workshops for environmental organizations, youth climate activists, educators, and community groups on hope and the climate crisis. Ellin has written numerous best-selling children's books, including You Are Stardust, and is the author of Hope Matters, Why Changing the Way We Think is Critical for Solving Environmental Crisis. She has served as a visiting fellow at the Rachel Carson Center for the Environment and Society and the Rockefeller Foundation, and so many more. With a focus on the intricate interplay between humans and the natural world, Ellin is dedicated to fostering a sense of agency and challenging the narrative of environmental doomism. Her newest book, How to Be Hopeful, Empowering Practices to Overcome Despair and Act for Climate Justice, will be published by Greystone Books in the fall of 2025. Thank you so much, Ellin, for being here today. If you want to briefly turn on your webcam and to introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, Isaias. I have them both on, but I don't seem to be showing
No,
up.
we see you. We see you now on our
Oh,
end.
that's great. That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm so thrilled that we're having this panel, such a great celebration of collaboration. So I look forward to the panel and the conversations that emerge from it.
Thank you so much for being here. And our next panelist that we have is Dr. Panu Pihkala. Dr. Panu Pihkala is from the University of Helsinki and is a leading expert in the interdisciplinary eco-anxiety research. He hosts the podcast Climate Change and Happiness together with Dr. Thomas Doherty and serves as an advisor for many projects about eco-anxiety, such as Climate Emotions Wheel, that is published everywhere and is an amazing resource. And he has been awarded several prizes in Finland for his books on eco-emotions. When leading workshops, he often cooperates with artists and educators, and lately has been working on ecological grief and people's complex process of eco-anxiety. Thank you so much again for being here, Panu. It's a very huge privilege to be here.
Thank you so much, Isaias, for that introduction, and very good to be here with all you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being here. Our next panelist is Tehya Jennett. She is a climate storyteller, award-winning filmmaker, and co-owner of the Stranded Astronauts Productions, which we work a lot here with QueerBrownVegan, and an artist collective and production house that specializes in social impact content. She directed Gen Z Mental Health Climate Stories in 2022, which was honored as an impact case study by the Jackson Wild and hosted over 75 community screenings, including at COP28 and COP29. And Tehya was selected as a 2024 Aspen Institute Future Leaders Climate Fellow and has previously served as the LA 2050 Youth Ambassador, LCOY Youth Delegate, and UNICEF Publication Content. And she's also recent film premieres include a new experimental climate short film called Dreamland that's in 2024 at the Climate Imaginary in New York City, and an eco horror short Out of Plastic that was done in 2023. And also Healing Lahaina in 2024, which is an amazing documentary at the Academy Award qualifying Hawaii International Film Festival. And she is currently co-directing the upcoming short documentary, How Are You Really?, that we're showcasing later today. So thank you so much for being here, Tehya.
Thanks for having us. And we're really excited to show this is like the first time that anyone is seeing this very sneak preview. Don't be too harsh. It's temp color and temp sound. But we've been working with Panu, Ellin, and Isaias. I'm referring to Maxfield, my other half at Stranded Astronaut, who is also in the audience today. We've been working with these incredible folks since January of last year. Went out to Finland last year to record a bunch of incredible interviews for this and have been working on it since. So I'm really excited to share it with everyone today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tehya, for sharing with that. Our last and amazing panelist that we've kept in our star power is Amanda Strong. Amanda Strong is a Canadian Screen Award and Emmy nominated director, artist, stop motion storyteller, and has served as a media based artist for nearly 20 years. She is Métis/Red River Métis and is a member of the MMF, is the Manitoba Métis Federation. Strong is the owner, producer, and director of the Vancouver-based animation studio Spotted Fawn Productions, Inc., where they create stop-motion animations, books, installations, and explore digital technologies that complement the handmade art of stop motion. She was also a director at Atomic Cartoons, director of the recent Emmy Award-winning 2D animated TV series Molly of Denali on PBS, and Strong started Spotted Fawn Productions as a space to merge her artistic interests and training with the dream to make stories move in informative, educational, and in entertaining and visually exciting ways. SFP utilizes a multi-layered approach on all unconventional methods that are centered in collaboration and community on all aspects of their work. Strong studio successes have screened and exhibited across the globe, most notably at Sundance, Cannes, TIFF Top 10, VIFF, OIF, Museum of Anthropology, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, and the National Museum of American History. Thank you so much again for being here, Amanda. And we're so excited to watch your short animated film that you created.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. As mentioned, we're going to start off with the portion of our private screenings. You're going to see 3 unique media projects that are going to be showcased. One is a collaborative interview media project that was created under QueerBrownVegan in association with Panu to explore climate change and emotions. The second one that you'll see, I believe, CV, maybe it's the first one, is a documentary that we've been working on. And the third is the short animated film. So we're really excited for you all to showcase that. So I'm going to let Stevie help us here to actually transition into the next stage of showcasing that. And we do apologize for some audio issues that we may have, but we're going to do our best to make sure that everything comes out as best as possible. So thank you so much, everyone, for staying put and being with us. To kind of begin this panel, I would love to begin for each and every one of you to briefly introduce more about yourselves and kind of the creative medium that you explore. But also the second question that we'd love to pair up in this conversation is, kind of saying, like, we know that the climate crisis is continuously to impacting everyone and every part of our lives. And we're seeing this mental health outcome to the forefront of this conversation of saying, how do we work to engage people with the emotional landscape of climate change? So I'd love to get started maybe first with Ellin, then we'll go to Amanda, Tehya, and then Panu.
Thanks very much, Isaias. Yeah, I think just what's really exciting to me about these 3 projects is the real recognition that eco-anxiety and other climate emotions are so prevalent and so important. And so Panu Pihkala is really a world's leading climate emotions researcher, and in recent years has created this model of essentially what experiences do we have? And that model sits within, eco-anxiety and environmental grief, the process model of that. And so in conversation, we sat down together and said, how do we make sure that this content, which is really relevant to so many of us all over the world, finds a voice, so that it's shared beyond academic circles? And so that's what really gave birth to this idea of a collaborative project. We know that 42% of the world is 25 years of age or younger, and almost all of that climate emotions content is coming through social media. And so the idea of ganging together, finding good ways of sharing, and really thinking about how the arts and film specifically allows us to explore these emotions that we so strongly are experiencing. And so I just wanted to add that one of the people who's not on our panel, but who was absolutely instrumental to all of this, is Mary Beth Leatherdale, who brought us together, who introduced us to the amazing Amanda Strong, and to Pixik, who, when you hear the animated film, the dance, you will hear the entire soundtrack was through Pixik, who are sisters, Inuit-style throat singers, who did all of the audio for it. So it's just been an incredible project of bringing together so many different forms of talent to try to take this issue, which is being looked at in an academic sense, and bring it to life and make it very shareable. So I just wanted to add that and to really thank everyone for being on the panel and for all of the work that went into each of these films, which we see as really a nested group of three different ways of exploring the same issue. And I'll pass it over. Who is going second?
Amanda, yeah.
Thank you, Amanda.
Hi. Yeah. So as mentioned, I don't come from an academic background. So what was interesting is when I was approached by this project, my strengths and I guess ways of exploring and expressing things are through the arts, through poetry, through animation and building sort of sonic and visual landscapes. And as an Indigenous person, I feel obviously these topics are something that we're really connected to and rooted with around, just the impacts of how development and industrialism and all these things have impacted land. And so I think naturally a lot of the stories that I have told, even without knowing it, were heavily talking about this idea of uh, climate grief and like the impacts of the emotions that we feel from what's happening in the world around us, and like I said, especially the land. And so it was really interesting to kind of hear it from the academic standpoint and this model, and to like actually have that in the forefront of creating the short film that we made, the dance with Pixik, as mentioned. So yeah, I just feel it's really important that the academia can set a great foundation and backbone, but that's not always accessible to people in terms of like digesting those models or high level words. So I feel the arts and film and animation are a beautiful space to take those concepts and express them hopefully in a way that's a bit more accessible for people that maybe don't have that academic standing or background. But yeah, very grateful and honored to be here helping explore this thing that I think so many of us are impacted by daily and questioning and feeling so deeply. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Tehya?
Yeah. It's interesting because I worked on two of the projects that are featured in this collective kind of ecosystem of understanding or communicating Panu's model and the kind of climate emotions and the coping and changing that we're going through in this moment of time. So I was brought in through Stranded Astronaut Productions with Maxfield Biggs to help film the Teaching Climate Together kind of short episodic series, as well as the documentary, How Are You Really, which birthed from just my really big interest in climate emotions as I kind of got more invested in how the climate crisis is impacting us mentally. When I first started working on Gen Z mental health climate stories, which was the very first short film that I directed inside of the world of climate mental health with the Climate Mental Health Network, I realized how much I was not naming the emotions that I was experiencing in relation to the climate crisis. And by seeing so many other people who were around my age talking about how it was impacting their life and their decisions and their future, I realized that I was holding a lot of that internally and had not connected the dots. And I think that that's a really big part of communicating for me, is connecting those dots as much as I can and seeing how all of the intersections of climate emotions, the entire spectrum of just not grief and anxiety, but also experiencing love for your community and joy in nature. That became a bit of a mission for me to help communicate this world a little bit more and help other people name their emotions. And when I saw Panu's model, it really locked in and made a lot of sense to me. And you'll hopefully see with the short film, the documentary, that I wanted to kind of embody the theoretical parts of the model, the action, the distancing, the grieving inside of the examples that I was seeing in my daily life as a young person in the climate movement. and be able to really show, like Panu says, that these are very intuitive to us. And we are already going through these transitions of coping and changing, and how we can fully lock into that in order to live within this ecological crisis and really take action in the way that is meaningful to us. So I hope that answered the question. But I think just climate mental health has really been an area that I feel a lot of passion towards in communicating with the tools that I have at my disposal as a filmmaker.
Thank you so much, Tehya, for that. Panu?
Speaking of emotions, I feel a lot of gratitude for this collaboration and also for you who decided to spend time by joining us here. So thanks for that, and hopefully this can be a time to be in peace with the topic and emotions. But you know, the world is what it is. There's surprising troubles. This time it's very surprising audio troubles in Zoom, and then one just has to try to cope and trust cooperation with others and be creative. So in a way, the troubles we are experiencing with technology in this session sort of mirror some of the dynamics of living in these kinds of circumstances. So I come from Finland, and like mentioned, I had the privilege of welcoming part of the collaborative into Helsinki last June. That was wonderful. And my native language is Finnish. And that actually has shaped my research on emotions quite strongly, because it's evident for me that words for emotions in different languages are not exactly the same. And if we would go into this deeply, for example, with Amanda's background, and there's some folks with Canadian background, and so there's gonna be cultural differences and linguistic differences. And as a researcher, I've tried to do as good research as possible, but also fully acknowledging that it's never 100 perfect in relation to reality, and especially with a topic such as emotions. So this translational thing, which has been going on into moving images and art, I think that's very fundamental. And sometimes we don't even need words, but we can engage with emotions via sensations, for example, different senses, and embodied and somatic methods are actually very important in this also. But words have their strengths. We know from emotion research that if we can name our emotions and mental states even roughly, then that gives us more opportunities to engage with them more constructively, as I think that Tehya was, for example, testifying just before I started speaking here. So the process model of eco-anxiety and grief could also be called with other names, but it engages with distress about the state of the world. There's going to be different chronological processes for people, and then there's thematic dimensions. The model simplifies things into three major dimensions of coping and changing, which are action, then grieving, including other emotional engagements, and thirdly, distancing, including self-care and avoidance. And I will not go now into nuances of the model, but just saying that if we simplify matters, it seems that we need elements from all these three categories. But action can be very different kinds of things. It can be creating films. It can be building community where you are. Even if you have very little social capital, there's something everyone can do in our relations with others and the more than human world. There's so many changes that we need to engage with also grief in that sense, or to put it in other words, grief and sadness help us to engage with those changes if we dare to go there in our societies. And we need to take care of ourselves and each other. So self-care in the sort of Black feminist sense is very much needed. And I've been very glad about this collaboration. And for example, Isaias and QueerBrownVegan have been covering a lot of similar themes in the past. And now it's been very interesting to work on these matters together.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for each and every one of you to really just showcase your story, but also your relationship. Before we get to the next question, I, as an environmental educator and also a media company under QueerBrownVegan, we really focus on climate literacy and producing videos that actually showcases the stories of intergenerational relationships. And, my relationship to climate change and mental health is also very personal as someone who really grew up really having difficulties identifying with the word environmentalist and not recognizing like what that actually looks like. And as I got older in my life, recognizing that we are all environmentalists. We are born to have affinity to the relationships to the land from our cultural experiences. And that is something that I often felt it was a bit hard for me to just even identify with that or see that as an expertise, because even though I did the science in the background of environmental science, I still didn't really recognize like where my place was. And I think media and creativity and storytelling is really where I found my foundation at. And so I think doing this collaborative project in which I shared with you all in the chat on everyone's about the eco anxiety process is where you can learn more about the projects that we are showcasing. And of course, we may have some issues at the end showcasing them, but we may be able to just show them with some a bit of the clips without the audio. And I think that will kind of give a visual, especially the short animated film, which I think it beautifully illustrates it without any audio. And I think it's like an amazing thing that we're definitely going to be showcasing at the end. So, I think to get started, for the next question is, Amanda, like I was really deeply moved by this animated short film that we're going to showcase at the end of this panel. But I kind of wanted to kind of like ask you from a creative and a producer and also storyteller perspective, you can talk to us about some of the creative choices that you made and why this project was so personal, but also maybe even the elements of the audio or the music that was being embedded in this short animated film.
Yeah, I think as Ellen mentioned, Mary Beth had the vision of working with Pixic, the sisters, Inuit sisters, and so I think they speak for themselves and have their own sort of emotional landscape through the sounds they make together collectively. Like they use their voice, but they also use some instrument. And so we knew like once we figured out the visual side of the story that we would be in good hands. And for most of the projects I work on, I love to have original music always. So what it means is like when we're done with the pictorial version of a story, it's like the sonic world is a reaction to that. So there's a marriage, and that it's not just slapping a song on or, a generic audio track. It's the musicians and that side of things become the other half of the voice and the emotions that you feel. So I think it was very exciting to know that that was going to be the marriage of what we were working on. And so, yeah, we really wanted to. I think at one point, it was a debate of working in stop motion and physical material, but just with time and budget constraints, it made more sense to work in 3D, which we don't do very often. But we really wanted to sort of encapsulate idea of like materiality and feeling like it was made out of material, but through the computer generated process. And yeah, just had a really wonderful team and group of artists that as we've been talking about, I think everybody can resonate with this topic. And so it made it a wonderful collaboration in that everybody had, similar feelings in terms of how to approach this visually. And yeah, so it was kind of trying to make a younger character that felt maybe a little more that like youth or younger people could resonate with in terms of just, experiencing, navigating their world and just really showing, where things are at in a sense that like nature is this, in a way, disconnected orb and that it's trying so hard to reconnect to us and that there's this sort of synergy of like how we all have to work together in like battling climate change and the negative impact that can have on us and kind of making that space to welcome back the natural aspects. So that was kind of our approach and working obviously with Ellen and Mary Beth, and they were guiding the story as well. So our job was to find visual representations of characters and the world.
Yeah, and I really love Amanda, like in the short animated film that we're going to showcase like later in the webinar, is like how much like it's like how much animation and art is able to illustrate a lot of those feelings. Like when we talk about anxiety, fear, anger, it's almost hard to talk about it, but it's very easy to visualize if we were to add animation. And I think that, in the short animated film that we see, like the whole huge cloud that looks angry or like ominous, it kind of gives this feeling of like a mix of anxiety, doom, and but then as you see throughout the short animated film, like it becomes like almost a part of the individual's life of accepting that that's what it means to be human in this world, to choose to love in both the living and dying world at the same time. And I think that's something where animation is such a huge role in being able to help us identify our emotions, but also our relationships and how we see that. And so thank you so much for doing that, because I think that is something that we often forget, is that it's not the same as reading a book at times or reading an academic paper, but watching something visually changes the heart. It changes the ways that we see things.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think you made a really important point, and sort of the end of the piece is like, I don't think the goal is that it's going to disappear or go away. It's a part of the world, and it exists. So I think it's finding ways to navigate that and work through it, and maybe not let it have, yeah, like we navigate how we can work through its impacts on us. And yeah, because I don't think it's going away, but
Absolutely. That's so true. Well, thank you so much
thank
again for
you.
that response, Amanda. I think that kind of leads on to our next question around, climate change and mental health, especially for you, Panu, that you've done some of the most extensive work around climate emotions and, their psychological impacts. And that's something that is very, very new to me, even as someone that was in college from 2014 to 2018, of not really even knowing about eco anxiety until I was maybe 19 years old. Is kind of like, can you share some of what you've discovered through your research and like what continues to surprise you? And also, like, I think even providing some more clarity around like it's not just young people experiencing anxiety too.
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Amanda, for that discussion on the short animated The Dance. I've been very impressed and struck by it. I would have some adjectives in Finnish, but I don't use them here now. So I've been doing interdisciplinary environmental research for more than 10 years. Before that, I was actually studying religion and ecology, so also environmental research, but especially worldviews, religions, people's meaning systems, which is a bit of a technical word. It's also a word. So meaning that how are the meanings in our lives in relation to each other? That's basically what it is about. And living in times like these, there's gonna be lots of different emotions, and it was really surprising in the early 2000s how little that was discussed anywhere. So that was a great revelation, and also lots of wondering for me around 2008 and 9, that why is this not talked about more, either in research or in practical environmentalism. Well, then I found that Ellin Kelsey, who is with us today, was one of the people who had been writing about that already then, and gradually it's been growing a lot. But I think that the absence really testifies to something important, and there's probably many reasons for that absence, but one is simply the difficulty of being emotionally in touch with what is going on in the world. It doesn't have to be that way, and if we grow in communities where there is social support for this, it's going to be totally different. So it's a big paradigm change, I think, especially in industrialized societies, of learning to appreciate emotion again, getting forward from some really gendered emotion norms, like thinking that showing emotion belongs only to certain gender identities, for example. That's one of the things we have to get over with. And then in my work, I've been trying to map this emotional terrain. Isaias mentioned the climate emotions wheel, which is a rather simple visualization of several different climate emotions, but it's been helpful for many people. And these kinds of simple things can help us to change that paradigm slowly, to learn to recognize emotions and talk about them and engage with the energies in these emotions in creative ways. And that's also what I think that this collaborative project is really about, but also trying to give people the invitation to experiment in people's own situations and places. So there's a lot of variety of different methods that can be done. And hopefully people together with trusted others will do that. Isaias, you mentioned also eco-anxiety and the mental health impacts. That's another long discussion, and just shortly commenting it, I think it's very important that, as my dear colleagues Caroline Hickman and Elizabeth Marks, eco-anxiety researchers from Britain, say in one of their papers, eco-anxiety is not a pathology, but it hurts. I think they are using the term ecological distress is not a pathology, but it hurts. So it can be so difficult for people that it actually counts as a mental health issue, but fundamentally it's related to caring about what happens in the world. So fundamentally, it's not a sickness, illness, pathology, but in certain circumstances, the world being what it is, it can lead to situations which are then problematic. So we are dealing with complex phenomena, but luckily together there's possibilities to engage with them constructively.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Panu. And I think there's like such a deep discussion that we can obviously go into, and also the idea that, like, you know, being able to care about something is you're part of the environment, being able to express those thoughts and being able to sometimes internalize them and to sometimes wreak havoc in our own lives, but to be able to have the courage to talk about these discussions takes a lot. And I think that's where, as a human society, we see that, you know, the climate crisis isn't just this crisis of, like, you know, failed science or failed models. It's also like you know, lack of connection that we're seeing today, and how people are able to talking about those emotions, which kind of leads me a little bit deeper to you know, Ellin and your work, right? Like, your work is bringing forward this idea of evidence-based hope, which I would love for you to talk a little bit about it for people who may not be kind of knowledgeable around evidence-based hope, because, you know, I've heard the term hope, but I don't know what evidence-based hope means. But also, like, you know, during these moments of despair, which we're living through, war, famine, disease, like ecological destruction, it is hard for sometimes for the average individual to have hope when they're showcasing all this horrible news and things that we're seeing. But also, how have you been able to help, you know, different generations of individuals to hold on to hope while still acknowledging that it's really difficult? And I think this kind of reflects back of the reason why we did this project together.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, so many important ideas there. The idea of evidence-based hope is to look at the things that we are collectively doing that are moving in the directions we need more of, and to make ourselves much more aware of those things so that we can build upon them, amplify them, put them into context where they're very important. And I think what's fascinating to me working in that climate emotion sphere is that it's not as if hope is against fear or against anger or against any other emotions. We can hold all of these emotions at the same time. And I think one of the really important points about that is some of those emotions give us a lot of agency. They make us feel very empowered. Hope is one of them. Anger is one of them. And I think one of the things that has absolutely happened as a result of the youth climate justice movement is a recognition of injustice. You know, climate change is an injustice. And so that's why we're angry about it. And then when we can take that anger and look at what things are moving in the direction that we don't get to hear about, because, you know, less than 3% of the media we hear about climate change even mentions a solution. So we end up with an impression that no one is taking any action. And so evidence-based hope is about a choice to be hopeful, no matter what is happening. Take that as a stance and then really go and look for where things are moving that we need to really amplify. That's the idea there. And I would like to just add too that I think one of the beautiful things about this project is this recognition that that resilience and agency is beyond just the human world. It's the greater than human world. And I think one of the beautiful things about all of the films is that we have this sense of the more than human world, the resilience that exists within it, and therefore our responsibility to, really bring our best because all species are resilient and dealing with these issues too. And in the animated film, the dance, I was really moved by the original idea of thinking about a trickster of fear. Fear is an emotion we have that's hungry to grow, and that idea of a trickster. And then how do we think about the agency of other species around that? And you'll notice that Amanda and her team just did a beautiful job of showing the agency of plants, the agency of many species in this very small and beautiful film.
Absolutely, Ellen. And I love that. I think that the stories of adaptation and resiliency are often lost. And that's something where it's like we are examples of resiliency and adaptations. And I think that's something where, we look sometimes to different worlds and understanding that we all share this collective future for resiliency, and that it's not just one select species, it's all the species that exist in this planet. So thank you so much for that. I think, as we go on to showcasing the exciting films that we're going to get to very soon, since we fixed the audio, is going to Tehya first to kind of talk about, your role as just a filmmaker, but also obviously someone who has produced and directed a lot of my own web series, like the Teaching Climate Together episode that we're showcasing with Panu, is kind of like what you've been learning and the documentary that you've been working on. Like, what have you learned in the process of the role of storytelling and processing these climate emotions? Because I know that your experience goes from not just creating one of the most successful Gen Z climate mental health docs that you did a few years ago, but also from Healing Lahaina and being able to work with community leaders on that to even this documentary that you have upcoming.
Thank you for that. I think that something I've learned that has completely shifted my worldview is the reframing that our grief comes from our love. The reason why we feel this grieving of places is because we love those places. The reason why we feel angry about inaction by the government is because we are scared of losing the things that we love. And finding that root source of love inside of my emotions has really been just an entirely different way of viewing the world and viewing my own emotions. And it was something that I've heard repeated a lot in the interviews that we did in Finland. And then I started noticing more people saying that as, I continued on through the year since. And I've heard that repeated a lot, that the root cause of why we want to fight for a livable future is because we love the people around us. We love the places around us. And being able to tap into that as my main source, my main, kind of burning fuel for why I continue to do this work has, I think, helped a lot with my own inner resilience, is going back to that root of what I love, what I'm grateful for, who in my community I am fighting for. And that's something that I've just wanted to reflect in the films and the different digital media sources that I'm kind of tapping into to just communicate as much as possible to people that the root cause of this is love. That is what we are being driven by. And that with Healing Lahaina, which was a documentary I created on the Lahaina wildfire from 2023, the documentary you would think would focus a lot on the fire, and it does obviously cover it. It was the deadliest wildfire in modern US history. But really our main focus was on the community resilience that happened after that. And I think that the reason why we focused so much on that was because of how I've been impacted by looking at climate mental health and looking at climate emotions and the source of them. So this theme of community resilience and theme of love has been my driving factor in what I'm communicating in film. It's completely changed the way that I'm viewing my climate justice work. It's helped me build inner emotional resilience to continue fighting in that way because I was absolutely experiencing burnout, as many young activists do. I didn't start out in film. That was not at all my life path. I was on a path to be an environmental lawyer. I just knew I had to be part of, the group that was fighting for climate justice. That was always my driving factor. I've always grown up loving nature and just wanting to protect it. And I found that communication, like film, like podcasts, I have a new podcast that's coming out with Sierra Club, like web series, this kind of open access education that you talk about, Isaias, is has become my primary mode of climate action and just getting people involved and tapping into what you care about and meeting people where they already are because people are already going to the movies. They're already on social media. So if we can tap into how they're, processing the climate crisis and get them to start thinking about how we can go from that doom and gloom to that action and that meaningful resilience, that can, basically open up this whole new world of climate justice advocates. So that's a little bit of what I've learned and what continues to drive me in this work. And I think I'll just give a little bit of an intro also for the documentary that will hopefully be screaming in just a second. I think that the main kind of driver for this was really reflecting what we're already seeing and being able to put that into a model that Panu has created so eloquently, and explaining how we can continue to process. And even since hearing that model and that explanation of finding the balance between these kind of three sections, has continued to drive me and how I'm continuing to find balance. And one of the main things that Panu actually said to me in talking about this model was he is worried that people will see it as too individualistic. And it really is a community-wide approach. And that's something that I continue to push. As much as we can say, like, yeah, one person can make a difference, and we have so many climate heroes, and it's totally true. What we really need is to be in community with each other and continue to tap into our community resources and be working together to create that resilience. So that's something that I also try to kind of reflect in the way that I'm communicating climate action and climate justice.
I absolutely love that, Tehya, and just how you really illustrate the ways that stories are being told. And I think there's so many different mediums and different, approaches that people are taking in their respective industry. And I think this is kind of a question for like everyone is that like, I think the truth is that yes, many of us here attending this webinar are probably within the environmental sector or work at some organization, or they're not part of the environmental spaces specifically, or work in different justice oriented spaces, creative spaces, in different industries. And I guess my question for each and every one of you is kind of asking like, what do you look forward to in your respective industry and career? And like, what are the exciting solutions that you kind of want to see happen? Because I think, a lot of people feel that they need to get an environmental job, but in fact, there's so many creative ways to continue maintaining those environmental values, even if you're not specifically in that industry. So why don't we start off with Amanda first, and then we'll go into Panu, then Ellin and Tehya.
Yeah, I feel that again, I personally feel the arts like in or storytelling is such a powerful vessel that like you said, sometimes it feels like to make literal change, you have to be in a very specific role. But I think being in if your way of storytelling has an ability to impact other people, even if it's just a few people, I think there's power in those methods. Or like, yeah, if your art form brings people together to speak on important topics, like those hold power. So just like being hopeful that it's beyond just like logical rules around environmentalism or climate change that I think can make the world feel separated in that sense that yeah, at the end of the day, we all are human and we all have, or most of us have empathy and are impacted by what surrounds us. So I think it's just there's lots of ways that, yeah, we can come together collectively to make a difference, and that gives me hope. Like I said, in a lot of the films we do, it's not necessarily in the sector of climate change, but yet it is. It at the core of a lot of the stories I think we're talking about at our studio, that message is the same. And like for like a call to action, a change or a hope in something that like brings us together in a different way. So I think that those are the things that give me hope, and that kind of make me keep doing what I'm doing, because sometimes it is hard, and sometimes you do ask yourself, like, is what I'm doing important, and does it matter, and is it helping anything at the end of the day? And I think when you do work collectively and have that community, though, you will feel that, and people will remind you why you're here and why you're doing this work, and that those are definitely the things that keep me going. And to also see people inspired by work, or stories or the arts, I think those are very heartfelt moments as well, when you do realize that, if whether it's a younger person, an older person that comes to you and be like, how can I help? Or, how can I get involved on the next thing you're doing? Like, those are the moments I think that give me hope for the future, and that even though it might feel like our piece and our role isn't really changing things in the big picture, but if there's enough of us doing those little pods, I think that definitely gives me hope.
I love that. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Yeah, that's powerful. And for me, in the last couple of years, I've been working a lot with grief and sadness. Luckily, that doesn't mean that my life is just gloomy. Actually, the sort of the opposites. If the channels are open for sadness, they are more open for joy also. But of course, there's certain burdens also in spending so much time with grief and sadness. But together with Climate Mental Health Network, we just published a new set of resources on ecological and climate grief, and just want to mention that. So those are also openly available online. And there's an article also about group work with the process model, the model which was so intimately connected with this collaborative project. And that's a direction I'd love to go further. So thinking about doing something collectively in relation with each other and the greater and human world, and also paying attention to what is nowadays often called somatic methods or embodied methods. And some of them emotion coaches are doing very interesting work on this. For example, if you notice in your body or in your body mind, I like the word body mind because it combines the body and mind. If you notice some kind of emotional energies, what could you do in an embodied way? And I've learned a lot about that in the last 5 years myself, and it's been very helpful for stress levels. But also then there's interesting avenues for something like moral outrage or climate rage, which Ellin mentioned. Glenn Albrecht has this word terra furii, a poetic one for that. So how to keep that alive in your body mind so that you have energy to work against injustice, and how to do that in a sort of embodied way. That's, for example, very fascinating, and I love to explore that creatively with others.
Thank you, Panu. Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I think I've just really come to believe that to choose to be hopeful, it takes ongoing work. It's a series of practices that we just have to continue to bring to whatever is occurring in the world around us. And I think that's been a real shift in my thinking, where I used to think, and often I'm in conversations with people who are feeling that, how could I feel hopeful because of these circumstances? I now see it the other way. It's a choice. And then because I've made that choice, it has an impact on the ways in which I choose to engage with things. But I have to keep practicing it, because I live, and most of us live in cultures in which sort of in a way talking about what we most care about, we usually express as in terms of loss, in terms of grief, that these things are terribly broken. So we have to be really vigilant around making safe spaces for all of those emotions, and at the same time challenging the narratives of, something's wrecked and is going to stay wrecked and be doomed forever, this fatalistic doomism. So I'm excited by that. And I think one of the things I really concur with what we're all saying is that we need to create cultures that help us to do that. And that it's been really thrilling to me over the last few years to work on more and more networked projects that, there's a beautiful project now emerging in the Salish Sea, which is across many nations on the border of where I currently am on the west coast of North America. And what's happening there is a decision across many environmental organizations to create a culture of hope amongst each other, so that all of the activism work that they're engaged in, they are being empowered by each other and the successes that they're having and the challenges that they're having and all of the feelings that they have around that. So watching these networks emerge that do create cultures, to me, is really exciting. And then I would just say the emergence and growth of recognition of the emotions of other species, the cultures of other species, how complex all of that world is, and really building that into the ways in which we think about these issues that we face and how we create safe spaces for those other species as well. So those are all directions I find incredibly exciting.
I love that. There's one statistic that has been driving my work, and just something that I keep going back to as I continue to think about who I'm making, films or digital media projects for and why. And forgive me for this US centric statistic. I'd love if anyone has a more global statistic to match this, please feel free to send it to me. But the Yale Climate Opinion Map from 2023 found that 72% of Americans already believe that climate change is happening, but only 44% believe that it will impact them directly, and 32% hear about it regularly in the media. So I noticed this really big education gap and information gap where we're not so much as needing to focus on getting people to understand that climate change is happening, but more needing to understand how it's impacting and what people can do about it. And that is creating this kind of, where I see in Panu's model, this loop where people understand it's happening and then they get scared by the doom and gloom and then they distance from it. And we're not giving enough avenues and pathways for actually getting towards that coping and changing and getting into that action, which then needs to be balanced by the other avenues. But if people don't have the information that they need to be able to feel in control and feel like they're taking control of what their future might look like through climate action, we can't build that emotional resilience and that community resilience. So something that I've really tried to focus on in communicating climate and film, which has become basically my entire professional career now. That's the only things that I like to really work on at this point. Is creating those pathways and avenues for what you can do next. If you saw this film and you're sad about how plastic is taking over, or how, the UN is giving us pretty dire statistics about where we're heading towards right now, what can you do next? How can you take those emotions of fear, anxiety, or grief and turn that into action? And I think that arts and storytelling and culture have always had this really big impact, and they can continue to do so in changing cultural norms and understanding better what is going on in our world. It's a really big tool in changing that transition towards climate justice and climate action. I'm part of the Hollywood Climate Summit, which is this annual gathering to bring entertainment industries and artists together to talk about how we can integrate climate stories into our film, because if we're not really integrating that, then it's science fiction. If we're not talking about climate in our, stories of the everyday, because climate change is already impacting us. And if we're not pointing towards that, then we're not going to be able to close that information gap that I stated earlier. And as we were actually making this documentary a couple months ago, the LA fires hit and it became even more real. And as someone who had been creating a documentary on the Lahaina fire, I had people reaching out to me asking if I was going to make a documentary about the LA fires as well. I was like, I don't want this reputation as a climate disaster documentarian, but that's the unfortunate reality is that is how it's manifesting in a very real way and starting to harm our communities really directly in ways that we can really, look at and start to scientifically categorize as how the climate crisis is impacting us. So I think that independent film and storytelling are really great avenues to catalyze on that and take those emotions that people are feeling in relation to climate disasters or other things that they're seeing on the news or in their communities and say, okay, here's the next step. Here's how you can start to take back control and build that resilience. And we tried to show that in the documentary is the actions that we saw. We captured a sunrise movement rally at Phillips 66 right after the LA fires. We captured a climate strike in New York on the Brooklyn Bridge. We captured an Extinction Rebellion protest in Finland to really show that this action is global and there are hubs everywhere where you can get involved. But action isn't the only way, too. So we have a climate cafe that we show, which is a way of coping with those emotions. And it's not a replacement for action. You need all of these to balance, but it is something that we need as well to be able to process that grief and come together in community. And we also showcase community care, like the healing spaces that happened after the LA fires, and just showing that the main thing is coming together. That is the ultimate tool, in my opinion, is coming together and gathering. And I think that storytelling already brings people together. So those really go hand in hand to me.
No, absolutely. And I love how we're talking about, as these more disasters are striking, there's a need to be able to visualize it. There's a need to document it. And I think this is where storytellers and artists come from. And I think for me, like, I really look forward in the climate media space that there continues to be this intergenerational collaborations and that we don't pit each other against each other and say, oh, the older generations caused this, where, and it's in reality, like our parents and our grandparents didn't contribute to the destruction of the planet. I think it's important that how do we look at these larger systems of industrialized systems that, have created ecocide, but rather the people that were forced to be in these industries at times to, create this damage. And I think it's important that we're going to continue showcasing on that. So we are going to actually try to showcase the private screenings. We cannot guarantee the audio is going to work, but Stevie is going to be preparing it right now as we speak. And if we're not able to get it working with the audio, we're going to send a direct link for the presentation to be able to watch it. You'll be able to see the full audios. They'll have the contact emails for all of us if you're interested, or just the group if you want. And then you'll be able to do that. And we're going to have a few Q&A also. So everyone's time on that end. But we just want to have maybe a very quick takeaway from everyone. I'll do a very speed round for all the panelists. Please keep your responses less than 30 seconds if possible, but kind of final reflections on the pieces of work that you've produced and what you hope people can get away from this. Maybe Tehya first, and then we'll go Ellin. And yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, sorry for a little bit of lagging there. It's a big project, but yeah, we'll be sending out the links so you can watch in full. Again, it's a sneak preview, so I'd love to hear thoughts. Also, if anyone wants to chat with us, you can also connect with me and Max, who are the co-directors at Stranded Astronaut on Instagram, or production@strandedastronaut.com. Just if you want to connect, I love meeting more people in the climate and especially the climate mental health space. And I look forward to just continue to connect with people. This project has been so fulfilling. And we are hoping to have a final version in the next couple of months, and we'll be letting you guys know as screenings come out. And thank you, Isaias, for hosting this. And thank you to everyone for being part of this wonderful collaboration.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I wanted to shout out again the Nestling Foundation, who brought us all together. and who really took up this idea of creating freely available, short, shareable films. You know, these ideas that they can be amplified and spread as widely as possible. So, the wonderful thing you could do is to spread these films through your networks and to keep this conversation about the importance of climate emotions and the ways in which we engage with them alive. So, thank you to everyone.
Amanda or Panu?
Yeah, just thank you as well. Echoing wonderful work, everyone. It's yeah, community and collective work is so important, and it's an honor to be a part of this project and be invited in. And yeah, also please reach out if anyone has any questions. Our connection on Instagram is Spotted Fawn Productions. So yeah, thank you again.
Also, warm thanks on my behalf, and very glad to see a bit more extended sneak preview of the how are you really. And also in relation to one Q&A question, how to reach more people, I'd recommend setting up a safe space and then showing some footage like this as an invitation to sort of connect more deeply. I know that's not a complete answer to that good question, but the fundamental thing that people actually need a lot of safety to get close to these difficult topics. That's quite groundbreaking, I think. But warm thanks, Isaias, also for hosting this.
Absolutely. And that was my first time also watching the short film documentary. And I was so shocked by how beautiful it's coming to be shaped. And I'm very excited. And these conversations are going to continue. And as mentioned, we will be sending all of this out. This webinar is recorded. We will be sending that out once we get it out later in the upcoming week or so. And we will be sure to email everyone with their social handles, the direct projects, and things that you can do. And also, we look forward to working with you all. And we're so thankful for the Nestling Foundation for supporting this programming, and University of Helsinki, Stranded Astronaut Productions, and QueerBrownVegan. And you can keep in touch with us via email or on any social media site. So thank you so much again, everyone, for being here today. We hope you had a wonderful day, and thank you so much again for everything. I'm going to ask, and thank you again. And we're going to be ending the webinar now. And I'm going to ask Stevie if he can stop for